What's up, guys? Hdemarzo here from the Tech Cruiser channel. Today, we're not really talking about tech, at least not in the typical fashion that you're thinking about. You're probably thinking, why isn't he talking about cell phones or tablets or, do have them. I do love them. Well, we are talking about vaping today. We're hanging out and rebuilding some atomizers and vaping some juice and just generally hanging out and having a good time. But I wanted to show you how to rebuild, if you have a rebuildable atomizer like this, how to go ahead and rebuild it, because you are going to need to eventually. When the wick and the coil start to get a little gunked up and you're past the point of a dry burn, you go ahead and rebuild it. If any of these terms are kind of foreign to you, don't worry. If you're new to the vaping scene, it's an accumulated vocabulary. It's not an overnight vocabulary. Though you can learn a lot by just hanging out and vaping and checking out atomizers and RBAs and cartomizers and what volts and ohms you like your coils. Are you a micro coil? Are you a regular coil? Are you dual or quad coil? It just comes. But let's get down to it. Let's go ahead and rebuild an atomizer for you right here. Okay, the first thing, it's always a really good idea to have a paper towel whenever you're doing this, or some sort of cloth, because the old coil and wick are going to have the juice on them, and you don't want that kind of getting everywhere. So it's a really good idea to have that on hand to go ahead and dab up any of that extra stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is we are going to remove the old coil and wick. Now, if you're running a little low on wire, one thing you can do is leave everything as it is and just pull the wick out, the wick material out, and replace that, and go ahead and burn off the sediment that gets built up on your coil, and it'll give you another couple of days, week or so, out of your atomizer, so that you can get to the store, or whatever you have to do to get some more supplies. So what you're going to need is, depending on what kind of atomizer you use, mine uses Phillips head or flathead connections to secure it. So you want to have a little electronic screwdriver with a flathead connection on it. You're going to need something to, now if you're doing a microcoil, which I recommend on these, you're going to need something to wrap the wire around to make your coil. And I have here a 3/32 drill bit with some tape on it, so I give myself something to hold on to. But you're going to wrap your wire around this portion here to make your coil. You're obviously going to need some wire. This is, I believe, 30 gauge or 28 gauge Kanthal wire, and my 2mm silica wick. Some other things that are really good to have on hand are, if you have a nail clipper for cutting the extra, you could use a pair of scissors or a pair of really sharp wire cutters. They do the same thing, but I found that the nail clippers work exceptionally well at trimming the excess off that you don't need. It's also a really good idea to have a pair of tweezers or small needle nose pliers. I'll explain what that's for in a minute. But once you've removed your old wick and coil, you're going to take your wire, your Kanthal wire. You want to have it fairly straight. If it's a little bendy, little like this, that's fine. But if it's really twisty and curvy and ziggy and zaggy like a lightning bolt, you're going to want to go ahead and get a piece that's a little bit straighter. Now when you're doing this, you're wrapping it around. So you're going to start by holding the drill bit end, so you have just a solid piece of metal to wrap it around. And you hold it with your thumb. Now this is just the way that I do it. If you have a different or better way that works for you, by all means, do it that way. Now I wrap it. You want to wrap it fairly close, and I'll explain why in just a few moments. Now I wrap it 6 times or 5 times, depending on the wire, the gauge wire that I'm using, because it'll yield different resistance, different ohms, based upon the wire you're using and how many wraps you're using. So you're going to take this coil and you're going to take your clippers or cutters or whatever you're using. You're going to clip off the excess, like so. So what you'll have is this on here. Now you can leave it on there or you can take it off. It doesn't really matter. I like to leave it on there while I secure it to the posts. Now each one is different. Every atomizer is different. Mine uses a slot loading top to get the wire in there. It may be necessary to take the coil off of whatever you wrapped it on, depending on what atomizer you're using, how deep it is. Each situation is going to be different based upon what, like I said, what you're using. So you drop it into the slots, and then you're just going to put your screw heads on there, or you're going to tighten it down just enough to keep the wire from slipping out and falling out. Now you want to have it pretty close to the post, but you don't want it to touch the post, because that will wind up shorting out your coil, and you will not be able to get any results out of it because it'll short it out. It's a whole electrical connection thing, which is why you only put them on loosely and then kind of put it where you're going to want your coil to sit, and then go ahead and tighten down your connections. May be necessary to hold the coil in place. You don't have to tighten them down very tightly, just enough to secure it in place. If you tighten it down too much, you can cut off the wire in a place that you don't want it to. And you have these two little tails hanging off. You can, I've seen people do this, grab it and twist it around to rip it off. Again, grab the cutters and go right up against the post and just remove the excess. Do that to both of those. If you're using a single coil, do it to both. If double coil, and so on and so forth, based upon what you're using. Now the next step is very important. The coil is facing straight up and down. You really don't want it to, because you'll have a very tough time getting the wick through there. Now very carefully, you're going to want to put the item that you wrapped it around back through, or something thinner. It doesn't really matter, as long as it fits through there. And you're going to lift it into place and straighten it out so that you'll get something like this. If it's not exactly to your liking, go ahead and do it again until you got it in a place where you are happy. Now this is where your tweezers or your pliers come in handy. This is how the microcoil is going to get its efficiency. What you're going to do is you're going to press and hold the button until your coil glows, just for a couple of seconds, and then before it cools, you're going to take your pliers and you're going to squeeze your coil together until it cools off. You're going to keep doing this until each wrap of the coil is touching the previous one. That's how a microcoil works. And I still have a couple pieces that aren't really doing. You can give it a light, just blow on it really lightly, cool it off. That's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm happy. You want it to, if you look at it while it's heating up, you want it to light up from the inside out, which it is doing. Perfect. So now you set this off to the side and you take your wick. Now depending on which one you've done, if it's a dual coil, you're going to do this twice, but I like to leave a little extra and tuck it underneath. So you make a single loop. It's about as long as the first portion of my thumb. You can take your clippers, cut it off like so. So you wind up with something like this. Now to get the wick inside the coil, take an extra piece of your wire and you're going to fold it in half. And kind of like threading a needle, I'm going to put it in the middle. So you have this. And then you take your mod and you're going to thread this piece through the center of the coil. Now it's important to be very delicate during this portion of it because you can mess up your coil, but very gently you're going to kind of, with some finesse, pull your wick through your coil. Now this is the reason why I pulled off a little bit of extra, because I will take this now and stick this underneath the coil. And you can use a pin or your screwdriver. I like to use my screwdriver to just kind of push it underneath. Now, you may be asking yourself, why are you doing this? The reason for that is because the extra wick that's under here will absorb more juice and you'll be able to get more juice in there. Now once you do that, you kind of want to trim off the excess, again using your trusty clippers or scissors or whatever you end up using, right to the edge of the atomizer, so that when you put the top on it, it'll go right on and not too much will hang over the edge, if any. Still have a little bit left. Now you're going to take, again, depending on which mod you're using, which RBA you're using, different pieces, different parts, it goes together differently. But you're going to put it on, and you want there's always a hole. There's always a hole in your addy. You want the hole to be right next to your coil. And that's very important because it makes for good airflow. And then you take your juice. Now you can, before you put this on, you can torch your wire and your wick. I find it's not necessary. Depending on where you get your wick, what kind of wick it is, it may be necessary. The wick that I had just purchased, just came in today, requires that you torch the wick before you go ahead and actually use it. Now when you first put the juice on here, you're going to want to soak it. And that's important so that you don't get a dry hit or dry burn, because it's terrible. And that's it. And it's rebuilt. So now you've rebuilt your Addy on your mod. You've rebuilt your coil. Now we're going to go ahead and I'll show it to you in action. The results are the fruit of your labor, so to speak. It's got great vapor production, as you saw. The flavor is amazing. It's not too hard, but again, that's going to depend on the juice that you pick. I'm running with an 80-20 mix, VG to PG, at 0.4% nicotine. So it's not going to be a very harsh hit, but it's going to be enough to just so you can feel it, and with plenty of vapor, how I like it. So we'll go ahead and we'll take another toot. So plenty of vapor production. Now on the MVP, I taste MVP, if you have one, there's a really good way to check what ohms your coil is running at. You press and hold the both buttons. 1 ohm. It's running at 1 ohm. It's perfect. I like this particular setup to run at 1 ohm at, I'll tell you here in a second, 4.5 volts. It gives me the perfect vape every time. So there you have it, folks. You've rebuilt your atomizer on your RBA. If you have any more questions about rebuildables or mods or vaping in general, drop a line down below. Not what you'd call an expert, but I have been doing it for about 2 years, and I have got to say, I started off with the little Ego battery, the 650, and a disposable Stardust tank, and worked myself up to this. So I am happy with it. I love it. So if you have any questions, I can recommend you in the right direction. If you're new to it, by all means, drop me a line. Let me know what you want. If you have any questions, I'll be able to help you out. If not, at least point you in the right direction. So that's all we have for today. Until next time, keep it real.